Hello. Hi, Manan.
Hi, Nancy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, every time when I play that countdown video, I always thought 60 seconds is kind of short. But then when I just watch it count down, it's kind of long a little bit when I'm just staring at the clock.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so tell us about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Manan. I'm currently a product manager, like many of you who might be watching this right now or maybe later on. And I've been in product management for a few years now. I've mainly worked across like early stage startups. Prior to working in product management, I worked across like big tech consulting, and then worked in the public sector for like a little bit of time. And the reason I got into startups in tech was because of my interest in like helping people and helping like small medium businesses. But after exploring it in government and like seeing ways I could help people through government, I had the chance to work under a product manager there, and really got to see like how to build things up from the ground up, in like a startup type environment. So yeah, over the past few years, I've been working in startups. One, I worked at a startup that went through IC, joined right after. We raised our Series A, and they were in fintech in the B2B space. And since then, I've been at a startup that focuses on permanent life insurance and like kind of democratizing access to life insurance to help people build wealth and kind of help their families and protect their families. So I really enjoy working for like mission-driven startups that help people and help families and help businesses. So have enjoyed being in fintech and excited to be here today.
And you've written a book.
Right. Yeah.
Tell
I
us
wrote a
more
book.
about your book.
Yeah. I wrote a book on product management at startups. So it's primarily to help anyone who's interested in building a startup one day. So whether they want to be a founder, a product manager, or an investor, I think it's a great introduction to them in terms of like, how do I just get started? Like, how do I break into product management? How do I take like a skills based approach to learning about product management? And like, how do I really open my career up for as many like different opportunities as possible in the future? So I think it's a very like, hands-on tactical book that kind of gives you like the step-by-step guide in terms of like how to break in. And I think like, working in a startup, we'll probably go into this a bit deeper, but I think there's so many like learning opportunities and ways you can grow as a person. So I'm really excited to talk about it and like kind of like help empower like next generation of like startup builders and PMs and beyond.
What motivated you to write this book? What were you doing at the time when you were thinking, I'm going to write a book now and not later?
Yeah. I think the reason I wrote the book was because I think first I wanted to see if it was possible. So I was just like curious, like if writing a book would be possible. I think initially when I started, I think having worked in big tech and consulting and like government, I got a chance to see like different work environments. But after working in a startup, I realized like the challenges here are like at a different level. Like you're really building a business from the ground up. And my first experience in product management, like full time, like that was genuinely one of the most like hardest experiences or like most challenging experiences I've ever had. And so I'd like write notes of like things I learned over time. And then eventually like I had like a few like kind of like pages of like one line notes and kind of just put it in my like sticky notes app. And then over time I turned those into articles. And then those articles like over like a period of like 3 or 4 months, I was like just putting out random articles online and like people were like reading them and they were kind of receptive of them. They were leaving comments and feedback. And so I learned like how to improve that writing over time and then eventually compiled all those articles into a book. And so, yeah, no, that was like kind of the process. So like notes to articles to like eventual book and just wanted to see if it was possible. And then two, I think I really just wanted to like give back because I think, working at a startup and working with founders, like it's taught me so much over time about like how to build a business. And so I really want to pay it forward to people who are interested in breaking into the space and
Mm.
see if I can help the next generation anyway.
So, your book is called The Startup Product Manager, a guide to become a product manager and startup builder. Is this saying that being a product manager is very similar to being a startup builder?
Definitely. I think being a product manager, I think fundamentally, if you look at like the design process and like you look at like the different frameworks that are out there, like Double Diamond, you're understanding problems that people have. Like you're looking at a market that can be disrupted, typically a big market, and a market that doesn't have much innovation. And you're understanding the problems and the customers that are there, whether they're businesses or individual people or any other like types of like organizations that exist. And I think when you identify problems and you work through with your team and just like in general brainstorm and think about like how to prioritize different solutions and like think about like how to build like a solution for an idea or like for a problem, I think in that sense you're building a business. So if you take the kind of like the design thinking approach and then merge it with like building a side project or like a business from the ground up that generates revenue, solves problems, and like just generally makes money and becomes profitable and grows over time. I think when you merge the thinking of like design and like kind of like business, that's kind of like what you get in product management at a startup. You really learn like how to build things from the ground up, and I think product managers are startup builders because they essentially like they work a lot with all the different stakeholders in an organization. So whether it's like the founders, CEO, CTO, CEO, like anyone in the organization, you get to work with at the executive level. You get to work with the marketing teams. You get to work with design teams, customer success, engineering. There's so many different like people that you interact with on a day-to-day basis internally, and also externally. You have customers, right? So you have customers, and you have partners, and you have so many different people that you get to interact with that like you're kind of like the diplomat for your organization and diplomat that like kind of like externally like faces like outwards that like works with customers and works with partners. And so there's a lot of things you have to prioritize and think through, and I think in that sense you become a startup builder over time.
And what was the kind of like the learning curve you went through when you went from big tech and consulting into the startup role, which is basically the first question we have. Why startup PM versus big tech?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the learning curve of like startups versus big tech, I think working in big tech, I really got to understand like the fundamentals. So working at Adobe, I got the chance to ship a feature and really understand the fundamentals of like working like with like enterprise clients and understand how things are done like at Adobe. I think at a startup, I really had to understand a lot of things like from the ground up, and like things weren't as structured. But I think in big tech, like any launch that we kind of did as a company, like it would have an immediate impact. I think in startups, typically, like in the very beginning, you're on a path to reaching like product market fit. So, like, how do you find a customer and a problem for that customer that is worth solving and a solution to that problem? And then eventually, once you get to product market fit, like, how do you scale that?
Hmm.
So I think there's like a kind of like a few categories of like the learning curve that were important for me and like just like things that I'm continuing to grow on over time. So I think one is like very like deep industry and functional experience from the get go. Like you kind of gain that working at a startup. So let's say you're in B2B, like I was working in B2B like lending infrastructure and like kind of like underwriting and like loan originations. So I really got to learn a lot of that from the ground up that I knew nothing about, I think, coming in. And so I really got to understand, like, like for instance, like how do interest rates affect our company? Like how do different types of loan products get like used by SMBs and their customers? Like I got to learn a lot about like that and like a lot of the emerging like fintech APIs that existed in the industry at the time. And then so I think just in general, you get a lot of deep industry experience, and then you get functional experience of like just like working at a startup, learning product management from the ground up. I think the second part of the learning curve is like you get to wear multiple hats. So this means working with multiple teams, like I mentioned before, and you get to experience different like PM roles. So you get to experience like core product, growth, platform, different types of like PM roles that kind of teach you different things. And you somewhat start as a generalist, and then over time you eventually specialize as a PM and kind of just like get that deep experience and the breadth of experience as a PM at a startup. And I think, you have that higher level of ownership from the beginning, but I think specialization for PMs typically happens like mid Series A, Series B onwards when you really get to focus on that one or like two things that kind of drive the business forward in your area that you're good at and you excel at. So I think before you reach product market fit, you're kind of taking an approach where you learn just like so much across different areas. But then once you reach product market fit, you kind of focus on like, what are the one and two things that I do well that can help like drive and excel the business forward. So I think from a learning curve standpoint, that's kind of like the things that I personally like think like help me a lot, and like you would learn if you joined a startup. I think also from an opportunity standpoint, there's a lot here. So I think from an opportunity standpoint, if you're a startup PM, I think there's a lot of different things you can do. So you can keep going up like the product route and keep learning from a product standpoint and like become a senior product leader. I think there's other things you can do too. So you could become a founder if you're interested in like starting your own company one day. Because I think as a PM, you're fundamentally just like seeing a lot of problems in the market, deeply understanding it. And as a founder, you'd probably do similar things, but in different ways. I also think you can be an angel investor, like having like work with different like teams at your startup. You'll probably find like a lot of people like go on and start their own companies. I think you'll also naturally interact with people in your industry, so you get a chance to like potentially invest in them and support their visions. And then I think the other route is like you could also become a full-time VC. So having seen a
Mhm.
lot of startups and seeing a lot of problems in your market as a PM at a startup, I think you naturally like might be inclined towards like pursuing like investing in the future. So I think the learning curve like kind of exists in that sense, and the opportunities exist in that sense.
Mhm.
Sort of PM who might be considering startups versus like big tech.
Let's say if I'm in grad school now, let's say I have an MBA and I'm graduating, how do I think about um and the preface here is I know I want to be a PM. How do I think about whether I want to be a PM in a startup or a PM in big tech? What questions should I think about when I'm trying to make this decision?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. So I think it really depends. I think this is like a tough question on top of that, but it's like you have to ask yourself, like, where do you kind of like want to be in the next like 5, maybe 10 years? Like, do you see yourself like starting your own business? Like, do you see yourself like continuing to be a product manager like for the long run? Like, what do you see yourself like kind of doing and like kind of mapping your like intentions there? So I think thinking intentionally about like the decisions that you make can be one way to think about it. I think there's definitely a lot of different like routes you can take, but I think especially if you're going to big tech, I think big tech is like a great option for like everyone. I think it's a great option because it gives you like the fundamentals of like working under a PM who's like worked in product management for a long time. I think you also get to see how your like work has a direct impact um, through like anything that you work on. So like, let's say you're working on Facebook newsfeed, like any feature that you launch related to newsfeed will likely have an impact on millions, if not like billions of users. So I think from the get go, you kind of get to see that impact and like end to end, you get to see a great process of like how Facebook runs stuff. So you get to understand their design process, you get to understand their way of executing, and like really get the fundamentals of like how they work. I think going to a startup is great because of like the different opportunities you get over the long run. So if you're thinking in like a 5 to 10 to 15, 20 year like time range, I think working at a startup fundamentally teaches you, as mentioned before, like let's say like the startup, what I recommend to most people is joining a startup like probably around like product market fit. So you get to at least see a startup that's like,
Mhm.
has an idea that's kind of like in the market right now that's solving a problem
Mhm.
actively for customers. So you're not like you can go like before that, like earlier. You can go to a bootstrap startup and you can go to like a startup before Series A. I definitely recommend that too. But I think particularly at Series A because like if you're a new like if you're a new PM, like you're coming from grad school or your MBA, you want to go for a company that's product market fit because I think first you want to learn execution.
Right.
And I think you want to learn execution in an environment that is like fast paced because I think that's like the most like kind of like that's like some of the most like true like I think execution at a startup and like at a business that's like growing quickly.
Mhm.
I think a lot of like the frameworks and kind of principles that you learn in big tech when you're moving fast in a startup and like you're burning cash and like your company has to grow, like you kind of
Right.
have to adopt like the approach that makes the most sense at the time. So I think working in a startup teaches you like how to just move quickly and ship things and kind of test things and measure them, see if they really move the needle like over time. And I think if you really want to learn like how to like grow a business from the ground up, like let's say you've reached product market fit, how to like scale it over time, I think those skills are very fundamental. And I
Mhm.
think in that sense, you learn like not only product management, you learn like go to market, you learn distribution, you learn like you might even learn like how to design if you like get into wireframing and like work with your designers. You might learn like if you decide to like code a front end thing, you might learn like how to like engineer something. But I think those are like very like edge cases of what you would learn. But I think fundamentally you learn like how to scale a business over time. And I think that's like something that will take you very far. Like whether, like I mentioned before, whether you want to become a founder or like angel investor, be a VC like full time.
Right.
Yeah.
How does how does a PM learn about product market fit? Should they join a startup to learn that, or should they join a big tech company to try to learn it?
Yeah. I think I think in big tech, the way that you reach product market fit, at least for like a new feature, I think is very different for how you'd reach it in a startup. Like in big tech, let's say you're working on not Facebook newsfeed. Let's say you're working on like Robinhood's like you're working on a line of like Robinhood's brokerage. Let's say you're launching bonds in Robinhood.
Mhm.
Robinhood typically trades stocks, they trade crypto, but let's say you're launching bonds, right?
Mhm.
Robinhood has an existing user base of, I'm not sure what their user base is, probably in the millions, right?
Right.
Let's say you launch bonds. You will know for a fact that you will get a certain percentage of that user base using bonds. You
Mhm.
might even attract new users to use bonds on
Right.
Robinhood. Um, that was just inspired off a startup that I think is like making bonds more accessible to people. But I think just Robinhood is just an example there. I
Yeah.
think you have that head start, I think, working in big
Yes.
tech. But I think it is challenging to get your user base up from like that percentage of those millions that Robinhood already has up
Yeah.
to like the user base that already exists for like trading index funds or trading crypto that already exists on the app. So I think growing is hard, but I think reaching that initial product market fit in big tech is probably like a lot easier, I would say, to get to a certain like threshold. I think at a startup on the other hand, like let's say you're working on a startup that is in it's reached product market fit, or maybe it's in the process of reaching product market fit. I think
Mhm.
you'll know when you reach product market fit, and I've kind of like seen this online where it's like you'll know when you reach product market fit. You'll know when like those like notifications are coming in that you're selling a product. When you have like customers who like want to talk to you about your product,
Mhm.
kind of like people are getting excited about it. People are telling their friends about it. I think at a certain point you reach product market fit when you know that you're creating a solution that has the potential to generate revenue for the company for the long run.
But how do
Um,
you know no? Because yes, you get
yeah.
indicators, but how do you actually know that you've hit product market fit?
Yeah, I think one threshold you can look at is like, like startups fundamentally in order to reach like I think, Series A, they have to reach product market fit, right? So that means like at least like $1 million in revenue. So if you know you can reach 100K in revenue recurring, or
Mhm.
even like, you can reach like that revenue like through non-recurring means. I've seen businesses that succeed through non-recurring means too. But I
Mhm.
think once you reach a threshold of like 100K annual revenue, a million annual revenue, like you'll know you've reached product market fit. So I think if you want to quantify it from the metric standpoint,
Right.
like that kind of like makes sense. But there's also like other sides of product market fit that don't necessarily like have to equate to revenue. Like you could have like user bases that are like thousands, millions of users. Like you'll like know like from a metric standpoint, like those are ways you can quantify it.
Yeah.
But I think from a pure revenue standpoint, if you really want to go like by like product market fit at Series A, typically it's at like 1 million to like 5 million in that range.
Mhm. Got it. And what are the skills that a PM needs to have when the company is close to getting product market fit versus scaling?
Yeah, I think when you're close to getting to product market fit, I think it's a constant challenge of like, you have to keep talking to customers and experimenting and figuring out like what your one, like what is the problem space that you want to focus on, and two is like what are like the kind of like the solutions to those problems. I think I think it's more important to understand the problem really well and
Yeah.
deeply that are out there, or the problems that exist that are out there, and
Mhm.
then like kind of test like very small solutions in a way that like kind of solves the problem.
Yeah.
So like testing like MVPs that kind of like, like let's say like I solve a problem for a customer. Like, does that MVP really like move the needle forward for the customer to begin? Like, can you see any like data that indicates that? So I'd say like that's the way that I would go about testing it. Like when you're like about to reach product, or like when you're on the track to reaching product market fit. So just finding like a really big market without much innovation, I'd say, or like it could have a lot of innovation. It just like will be like a little harder if you have competitors, right? But let's say you're in a big market with like not a lot of innovation. You just have to understand the problems really deeply, the customers really deeply. Like there's terms like ICP, like just really understand like those customers really well and like test out solutions for them and really like measure the results and like just track the data. Because I think data at early stage startups, like it's very important to make decisions based on data, in my opinion. Like of course you can get one customer that's like an enterprise customer that can generate 100K in revenue. And in that sense, you don't need to necessarily measure data for every single customer because you know for
Mhm.
a fact your solution works. So I think there's definitely exceptions to that. But I think like you'll know when you reach product market fit, as mentioned before. Like you'll be
Yeah.
generating revenue, you'll have a certain amount of users or
Yeah.
engagement on your app. In terms of scaling past product market fit, I think it's a little different because I think once you reach product market fit, I think it's very, very critical to dial in into your existing process. So let's say you've created a solution that like generates like 1 million a year for your customers, or 1 million to like five. I think what's really important is like really like focusing on that solution and making it as good as possible for customers. So
Mhm.
that might mean like offering like adjacent solutions or even like doubling down on what works. But I think really doubling down on that core customer problem that you solved to get to product market fit and then just seeing if you can keep iterating that to bring it to scale is what's important. I
Right.
think once you get to like product market fit at scale, which is probably like like 10 million in revenue, I think
Yes.
that's when you start experimenting with like newer product lines and seeing if you could expand beyond that to get to like 100 million
Makes
and like a
sense.
billion. But I haven't
Mhm.
gotten to 100 million yet, so I haven't had that experience. But I think that's what I've read in like from like people that have like built startups. Like they start to experiment a lot more once they get to 10 million.
Yeah,
Or that's the way that's recommended, especially now in the current market.
makes sense. Now, in your book, one of the most interesting chapters, the chapter that really jumped out, is the habits that will help PMs be more effective. Tell us why we should be building habits as product managers.
Yeah, definitely. So I think I was watching this recent interview with like Tom Brady actually. So Tom Brady's 7-time Super Bowl champion. He was like a 7th string quarterback at one point, and then when he joined the NFL, he was like a 4th string quarterback. And I think the thing that resonated with me, and like things that like would resonate with you if you were to join a startup or like become a PM, is that like it's about kind of like your process and like your routine that kind of like builds those skills over time. And I think habits are very important because like if you can move the needle forward even like just like a little bit every day,
Yeah.
like that can result in like compounded progress over time. And so like if you have those little small wins over time, like you don't necessarily have to like, build like a skyscraper in one day, right? Like you put the foundation first and then you start like putting piece after piece after piece. Like I think similarly, like from writing a book, like I I I thought it was like impossible at first. I think like for a lot of people, like they think like certain things are impossible in life, but as long as you just like put one step forward and then keep putting
Hmm.
another step forward after that, like you'll figure it out. So I think in terms of more of like a metrics based approach, I think like why should you build habits? I think one reason to build habits is like looking at like James Clear, like Atomic Habits. A lot of people have probably like read that or like come across that at some point. He has one graph that's like the power of tiny gains, and he says that like if you get 1% better every day for a year,
Hmm.
you will be 37 times better than let's say before, right? And let's say you get 1% worse every year, you'll be it comes out to like 3% worse. So if you get 1% better every day, that means you'll be 37 times better in what you do. So if you really focus on one thing and improve that habit over time,
Yeah.
you'll get a lot better over time. So that's what I would say in terms of like why you should build habits.
How do we even build a habit to build habit?
Yeah,
Kind of like kickstarting it. Because let's say right now, I hate exercising, for example. I just cannot even get myself to take that one step or to get to that 1%. How do I even get there? I guess the question is, what is the smallest step that I could take?
yeah, yeah. That's a great question because like I started going to the gym like more frequently, like even just like a year and a half or 2 years ago. So I think for even things that seem intimidating at first, I think just taking the first step is important. So that means like let's say like you have an idea of like which gym to go to, or like you have like an idea of like what activity to pursue. Like do the first step that seems most comfortable to you. So let's say you want to go play like a sport with a friend, or you want to go to the gym. Like just ask your friend if they want to go to the gym. If that doesn't work, try something else. Like put on like get your clothes ready for the next time you go to the gym, or
Yeah.
like map out your route and just like say like at this time on my calendar, I'm gonna go to the gym. And then like when I get to the gym, I'm not gonna know what to do, right? But I'll just like on that first day, I'll look like kind of like like I might not know what I'm doing. Like there's a lot of people that come to the gym. So I think like if you know like once you get there, you'll probably see a lot of people who like might be just figuring it out too. So I think like yeah, just do like focus on one thing every day to like get better
Yeah.
at. So like honestly, like when I moved to like go to a new gym, my first like goal was just to figure out like where the machines were. Like I didn't even
Mhm.
plan out like the workout. Like I think if you
Mm.
plan too much up front,
Right.
you can create like a lot of like built up like
Yes.
tension over time. I think
Yes.
the one thing that I learned working at a startup is like just like go in, like dive in head first. Obviously like have certain constraints of like what you're doing, but like yeah, just like dive in. Once you've like done it once, then like just figure out like how to improve from there after that. So I think yeah, once you've like gotten that initial experience,
Yeah.
then that's when you start like maybe consuming content or like learning from others or doing more. But then slowly over time, you'll figure out like how to figure it out. That makes sense.
I love that. I love that. Slowly over time, you'll figure it out.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So you said one of the habits is wait, was it? Yes, one of the habits is to become a product expert. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so this was advice that my previous CEO actually gave me. So I think what's important is that whenever you do become a product manager, especially in your first like 30 to 60 to 90 days, I think is kind of use your product as much as possible. I think this is like the easiest habit to build, but it takes the most effort because I think
Mm,
as a PM, like you're really focused on like how do I move the needle for the company from day one? Like how do I kind of like ship a feature and like get something that's delivered, especially in like this market, you're like, how do I like get results right? But I think doing that upfront work of like really understanding the product end to end and like how each like user uses it. So let's say you're working on a B2B product, like how do people internally in your company use it? How do your customers use it externally? Like knowing like how the different personas use it, or if it's consumer products, it's even easier because it's like something that you would probably have used before. So like I think just using the product and like knowing it end to end is important because if you're going to be the one that's building it and like kind of like talking to customers and understanding their problems, like I think coming in with that knowledge of like being able to like know the product end to end, maybe not from day one, but like over time you kind of build that knowledge, like that can be really helpful. And so I think one is like knowing like how to use it end to end is really important. I think two is like how is it used in the context of like your customers. So if you're building an internal tool for your team, like how does your team use it? And then like how like let's say it's like used externally by your customers. How do your customers use that tool? So I think there's different ways that different customers use your product, and so I think it's important to know that. I think further, when you know how your product works and when you know how your customers use it, I think one thing that personally I'm trying to get better at is like how's your product used in the context of the market. So like knowing like how your product is positioned amongst like competitors that are out there, or like just generally like where does your product stand in the market, and like what is the unique solution that it like kind of like adds to like the market that you're in. So let's say you're in like the e-commerce market and you're building like an end-to-end marketplace like for creators, like understanding why like your product is a differentiator for
mhm.
creators right now is like really important because like the creator economy is growing really quickly. Like you're like one of the new innovative solutions as a marketplace for creators. Like knowing like how you'll compete with Shopify or other like products that are out there, I think knowing like that and being self-aware of where you stand in the market and like what your unique solution is really important. So I think, yeah, just to summarize, like one, like knowing your product end to end, two, like knowing like how your customers use it internally and externally, and three, like knowing where it's positioned in the market is very important.
What are some of the best ways to know how your customers use your product?
Yeah, I think there's a few ways. So I think one is like you can conduct like qualitative interviews of like understanding like how customers use your product. I think two is like you can study like how they use your product without talking to them. So you can study like kind of like depending on like the software that you use, you can like kind of like record how your customers use your product. And especially for like consumer products, I think it's like definitely helpful. I think for B2B products, it's helpful too, especially the more volume that you get over time. So like even just like taking the effort to like get that qualitative feedback of like how customers use your product without even talking to them is important
Yeah,
because I think that helps you scale your time. Because like let's say you can only talk to a certain amount of customers every week, you can definitely like still study them on the side and like understand like how they use your product. So I think it's important to talk to customers because like just in general, like that's like the job of being a PM and like
right.
being a founder, like knowing your customers really deeply and well. So yeah, talking to customers and then like just studying how they use it without talking to them is how I
Makes
would.
sense. Engineering would need to instrument the right logging for us to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then yeah, talking to engineering and just finding ways to work together. So yeah,
The second habit we should build would be building stakeholder relationship. What do you mean by this?
yeah. I think building stakeholder relationships is like one of the most underrated kind of like parts of like product management and just like startups and like life in general. I think it's really important to know like who you're working with and like who you're building a company with. But just in general, like you're gonna be working with these people from like minimum like 9 to 5, like in your time
Mhm,
zone or like even like longer. So I think it's important to like get to know who they are as people and like find those common interests. So I think like even like some of my coworkers like at my first company, like we all like had a passion for football, right? So we started like a fantasy football league, and through that effort, I got a chance to know like a lot of people who I necessarily like wouldn't have worked with. So I got a chance to like work with people from the sales team, the engineering team that I necessarily might have not worked with. They might have been in a separate pod or a separate part of the organization, and I got to meet them because we had like a similar interest in football. So I think somewhat like that, like I think finding a way to like instrument that in your company. It doesn't have to be a fantasy football league because I know like startups have to stay focused and like a lot of companies have to stay focused, but like just finding ways to like get to know people on your team is really important and like what their interests are. Because like once you get to know who they are as people, I think it just makes it a lot easier to like learn like how to work together. I think too is like once you like understand like how you can bond over like common things, understand how you can most like help them. So I think talking about their day to day, especially early on when you join a company, I think people are quick to like create change early on in their first 30, 60, 90 days, like I mentioned before. I think it's really important to understand like, like what are the top problems like your different stakeholders are facing. So like what are your engineers facing, or your engineering lead, or like what are your designers facing, what is your like head of product, or like let's say you are the head of product, like what is your CEO facing, what are your co-founders facing, what are your customers facing. Like you definitely should know what your customers are, what problems they have, but like I think generally internally in your organization, like kind of like knowing like what their day-to-day is, like having recurring syncs and like communicating what you work on is important. Because if you can take their most important problems off their plate, especially like your manager or your CEO, like that's kind of like how you move the company forward, especially because they've been in this market for a long time. They kind of like understand the problems, but then like once you kind of like start solving problems for them, then you can start solving problems for customers adjacently or even like later on. But typically there are a set of priorities when you come in. So I think it's important to like kind of like know what people's like problems are or opportunities are and kind of like, working like to help solve them.
What happens if we don't have a strong relationship with our stakeholders?
Yeah, I think you need to find a way. You just like you have to be like like if you have a strong relationship with your coworkers right now, I think it just starts with like even like a message. Like how do you typically like just get to know people? Like you usually like text them or send them a message. Like you send them a message about like, hey, this is cool that you're what you're working on. Like I'd love to know more about it. And like could we set some time up to talk about it? So I think like some things I've learned like working at a startup is like you just start working on a project like with like a designer or like an engineer, and then like slowly over time you realize you have like follow up syncs and like kind of like ways to like kind of keep that relationship going on, that project going on over time. So I think first it starts with like a message, and then like from there it just like you just like maybe keep recurring syncs, or like even if you don't work together, like find ways to like find common ground over like interests. Like I think even when you're working remote, like you can kind of tell like what some people are interested in. Like maybe they have like pets or like they have like something in their background that's interesting or something unique about them. And like you just pick up on those little things and like, just build up the relationship over time.
What's the consequence of not building this relationship?
Yeah, I think it's like it just feels like everything can be like transactional, right? If you don't like build up a relationship with like your coworkers, especially, I think it's just like you're just like working together, like solely like just working from like 9 to 5. I think making it fun and like finding ways to talk about stuff other than work, like even for the first like 5 minutes of your call or even at the end of your call, like I think it's important just because like it just like maybe you have something to look forward to in your next call, like even if you're working remote or even in person. I think it just makes it like a lot more fun, and like even if you're an adult and like work is work, like you can find ways to make it fun and just like find ways to build a relationship over time. So I'm optimistic in that sense, and that like just like you don't have to talk about like stuff outside of work, like all day or anything, just like for a few minutes, and like build that up over time. And then like yeah, I think that even like helps you become more creative and open and like trying out new ideas. So
The
that moves you
worst
forward.
that could
Yeah,
happen is you don't make progress as a
exactly.
team. That's
Yeah,
the worst. Um, and so
yeah,
relationships go a long way. All right. Your third habit is ship something. Now, what do you mean by this?
yeah, definitely. I think that it's important to ship something. I think it's important to like understand what it takes to like kind of like just like you have all these ideas as a product manager probably. Like eventually after a period of time you're gonna have like this set of ideas, and like you're constantly thinking about like different customer problems there are, and like you have different solutions to these problems. I think what's important is like showing that you have a body of work. I think whether you're breaking into product management or like a different career or anything, I think what helps the most is like building up your brand and like Showing that you have a body of work, showing that you've had an impact in your previous job. But like, how do you do that as a PM, like in your current job? I think the way to do that is like just like ship something. So I think in your first like 30, 60, 90 days, like as mentioned before, if you can find a way to like just like ship something and move some needle or like instrument a new process or like do something, I think it just teaches you a lot about how things work at your company. And I think working from like idea to incept or like from inception to like the final product, you get to work with design, engineering, your go-to-market teams and beyond. So I think it's just a great habit to be able to like just ship one thing in a given time frame and set those like timelines and like set that delivery timeline. Because it just teaches you like how things work at your company. And like once you learn execution really well, that only helps you become better and better at strategy and like kind of like shaping the roadmap and the future vision of the company.
What happens if the PM doesn't ship something in their first quarter or so? What's the consequence?
Yeah, I think at that point you like if it's like the first quarter, that means it's been like 3 months, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, what is really like blocking you from shipping? I think ultimately that's the question there. Like, is it that like this is not important to work on right now? There needs to be more discovery. Like, I think at the end of the day, what's important is like being able to prioritize and think about like what's really important. Like shipping might not be the most important thing, but I think typically for most people, being able to ship something is important because like if you can change the product in some way to solve a problem for a customer, you're finding a way to solve that problem more deeply and like maybe potentially generating more revenue or more users or leading to more users or increasing engagement on something. So I think being able to ship fundamentally is like one way to go about like just growing as a PM. But I think what's most important is like being able to like just like prioritize. Like, what else are you focusing on that's not like creating a new feature that solves a problem? Like, what else are you focusing on and kind of evaluating that? Yeah.
Does testing count as shipping?
Testing in what sense?
Let's say I'm only testing with a certain percentage of my customer base, so I didn't ship it to everyone.
Yeah, I think as a startup, I think testing is really important. So I think testing can be a way to like ship before like officially launching your production. So I think you want to test and like iterate and see how things work over time before you eventually like ship a feature fully. So I think especially in big tech, like where like the consequences are a lot higher of shipping something. But like at the same time, you want to balance it with like being able to like have a product that's like finally out. So I think being able to measure and being able to test and take that time to like get those results before you fully ship are very important. I think, especially at a startup, like I think the earlier you are, the less risk there are. The less risk there is to like not testing. But as you grow and grow over time,
Right.
especially as you have more users and like there's more risk to revenue, I think testing is very critical and very important before you actually ship.
So, in this context, does it mean that testing something is kind of similar to shipping something?
I think testing is very similar because like you get some insights from the test, like whether like something works or not. Like at least you've talked to some users or like seen how users use something and like measure like engagement and like measure the metrics behind that. So I think in that sense, you're shipping to like learn like how to like inform the next decision that you make. So I
Mhm.
think it's just really important to like do the upfront testing and then also like eventually ship. And
Yeah.
I think depending on where you're at as a company, it definitely it's different on where you're at. That's what I mean. Yeah.
What happens if in this startup environment, engineering ships without you, the PM?
Yeah. I think when that's happened in the past for me, whenever engineering ships without the PM like knowing or like whenever like the like yeah, whenever it happens, I think it means it's like there's not enough like alignment across the full organization. So I think as you grow as a company, those consequences are higher and higher. I
Mhm.
think early on you can get away with like, team shipping and like not communicating. But I think as you grow more and more, I think it's increasingly important to like have that alignment because like if someone ships without you knowing, then like that might affect like, like how much revenue you just generate day by day or like, week by week or month over month. So I think
Right.
there's a lot of like downstream impacts of like not knowing what's going out. So I think increasingly as you grow as a company, it's very, very important to like have all the teams aligned.
Makes sense. All right, habit number 4 is prioritize. What do you mean by prioritizing? What are we prioritizing for?
Yeah. So I think as a product manager, whether you're at a startup or big tech, I think there's like one framework that I like by Shreyas. It's like there's like the LNO framework. Check it out online. But I think higher level, like in general, as a PM, and like whether you're building a startup or like or anything, just in general, I think it's important to prioritize and like have a set of like principles that you're like kind of optimizing for at work. I think like let's say like in your career you like want to do certain things in the next like 5 years, and like these are your set goals, like 3 or 4 goals. But let's say like on the job, these are your set 3 or 4 goals for your customers and for your company. I really think about like week to week, month to month, and like kind of like over the quarter and over the year, like what are those like key things that kind of move the needle for those top priorities that you have in general, and like kind of just be very clear and like diligent about like what you're working on. So I think focus is like one of the most important habits like for PMs, like especially like because like you could have like stakeholders internally, externally, like kind of telling you like what to build or like giving ideas or suggesting things, and like it's your job to be able to prioritize and focus. So even like you might have like 100 ideas of things you want to work on, but I think until you have a clear like kind of like framework for yourself, like not like another framework that someone proposes, but like you have to develop your own framework of like how do you focus on that, like how do you prioritize on what's most important, like across everything that you kind of hear. So I think
Mhm.
one thing that I learned from Shreyas especially is like he always recommends like focusing on like a mix of like high leverage tasks and like tasks that might not necessarily be as high leverage, and like tasks that you just need to get done. So I think that's like very, very important for like working in a startup, especially. So like high leverage tasks are like what moves the business forward, what helps customers. But at the same time, you're gonna have like tasks that not don't necessarily like create leverage, like tasks that you just have to get done. Like
Like filing your expense report?
exactly, yeah. Like you just have to get it done and do like an okay job at it, right? So I think it's very, very important, especially to just like balance like how you focus and like how you prioritize. So I think the other thing is like you can't necessarily do everything. Like you're one person, and like over time you need to learn like how to like delegate and like how to just like get people to like like take on work or like work with other people and just like collaborate. So I think you can't necessarily like do everything in a given day, or otherwise you'll burn out as a PM. I think definitely in like previous experiences, like I would like just like spend as much time as possible getting like every single thing done. But after a certain point, you kind of like reach a cap of like this is like the max of what you can get done. So I think do what's important and delegate and save what you can't do for later. And like just knowing that like not everything is urgent. Like even if someone says something's urgent, like let's say like typically internally, what I would say is like some people might say something's urgent, but it might not necessarily be urgent. I think externally, when your customer says something's urgent, I think there's ways to navigate that, but typically for your customers, you want to get stuff done. Like let's say you have a huge enterprise customer that's like demanding a certain feature or something. Like there's ways to navigate that conversation, and like you'll learn that over time. But I think internally, usually like not everything is urgent, and there's a way to
Mhm.
like prioritize and still move the needle forward for the company every day or like every week or every month. So I think just being able to like navigate that comes with time. But yeah, I think staying clear with your focus, learning like how to be open and like adapting that strategy that you have, but then also like knowing that not everything's urgent and needs to get done on the same day is very important.
What if people you're working with don't agree with your prioritization framework?
Yeah, I think the way that I like to think about it is like what is like really like how do you relate what you're working on to like the business goals or like the customer goals. So let's say like the business wants to reach like you know 5 million in revenue. Let's say you're generating like 2.5 million right now through your product. Like you might already know what the core problems are for customers right now, and like you probably quantify like if you solve this problem, like this could lead to like this much in revenue. I think being able to like align people on the context is really important, because if people are questioning the strategy and the vision, that means that one, you haven't involved them with like how you develop that from the beginning, and like two, it's like you're not like quantifying or like justifying why you're
Mm.
working on something. So I think if there's questions around like why you're doing something, I think it's really important to provide like metrics or like data or like feedback from customers or like stakeholders of like why it's so important. So like typically what I see as a PM like at a startup is like usually it's like important stakeholders told you that like this is very important. in order to get to this metric, or like customer has said this and like they're like kind of like demanding this, or like maybe they just really need this in order to grow as a company. So I think those are like some of the common scenarios. So I think just being able to like like be more transparent with your team, like be like like this is important at this period of time, and like creating a roadmap is very important. So I think being able to stick to a roadmap and adapt it over time is really key. Just because like you could go over a roadmap with your team and like say like this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it,
Right.
and like really get their input on it. Because I think when you show them the vision and like strategy, and you're not just like taking things from a backlog and just like executing on them at a random time. I think when you have a clear plan, even if it's like even if it changes over time, because things always change at a startup, right? I think being able to like have a coherent way to like plan stuff is really important, and like getting them involved in like the reasoning and rationale for why you're prioritizing it is key.
What if the CEO wants everything?
Yeah, that's a tough question. So I think like having worked with like CEOs in the past, I think the CEOs like a lot of the time like they typically have a lot more like industry experience than you. I think
Hmm.
they understand the market a lot better. But I think not all the time can you like really get everything done that someone requests, right? So like you don't have enough infinite time in the day to just like keep doing stuff for like like one person or like two people or three people. But I think you should be like listening and like working with them to define a strategy. So I think if you're in that situation where the CEO is like, okay, you have to do like 15 things by tomorrow, I think it's important to be able to like connect with them and like have a sync with them to kind of like give them the options of like what you can focus on. So I think like if you have a list of 15 items, I think you as a PM, you have to prioritize them, because I think the CEO essentially like wants you to execute on all of these 15 items, but I don't think they have the expectation that you'll get it done by tomorrow necessarily. I think you have to really like kind of build it out and like show this is like how we'll execute it on over time. So like these 15 items we can get done over the next 2 weeks or like next week, like more feasibly, and like this is like our timeline for how we get it done. So I think that's kind of like like an edge scenario or extreme scenario of like something happening. But like I think like being able to like have a sync with your CEO, like if they have like 15 to 30 minutes, like propose like kind of like a plan of action of like how you'll target these different things. I think that's very important, because like when you get them on the same page and communicate of like what's feasible and what's not, I think people are really understanding and receptive to like like as long as we have a plan of action, as long as we have a strategy and like coherent way that we're addressing this, I think this totally makes sense, and like we can be on board with this and kind of like just like check in on delivery over time and like keep doing that over time. So I think often it just takes a call and takes like a way to like kind of like level set on expectations. I think that's the important part. So like being able to talk and like set expectations and like timeline is very important.
Makes sense. One last habit for today's discussion is focusing on fundamentals. What are what do you mean by fundamentals?
Yeah, I think in product management, like we often use like a lot of big words. Like we talk about like certain like I think a lot of people know what they are. Like there's certain ways to describe like how you're doing something, different frameworks that you use, and like making it like really fancy, and like this is like how you think about stuff, and like this is like how it works in the tech ecosystem in Silicon Valley. And like I think I learned a lot from like just like you know going through a startup where like we saw a lot on our journey to growing, and like I think like the important part is to like keep it simple. Like I think the fundamentals are that like your customers and your teammates often have the best or some of the most or like most answers to your problems. So I think being able to talk to your customers, talk to your teammates, collaborate with them, like often you'll get the best ideas and answers from them. And when you empower them to like put them in a situation where they can give ideas and be collaborative with you, they can often like find solutions that you as a PM like don't necessarily have on your idea list, or like you haven't thought of already. So I think the fundamentals are that like just talk to the different stakeholders, like set time, and like just be able to like collaborate and brainstorm. So I think another like kind of like fundamental thing that I've learned over time is like if you're building a business and like you're trying to generate revenue and keep costs low, and like kind of like just grow the company over time, like focus on like the top problems that your customers have, focus on what's most important for the business, and that's like I think that's kind of it. Like definitely like side projects that you have to do over time that like kind of like might not necessarily move the needle from day one, and like you kind of have to build those things. What's most important is like what's most important. So I think keep the main thing, and to like be able to like form them, like be able to like to them and like and say that like we're going to focus on these key things and this is what's important and like kind of like do that over time. So I think kind of having like a narrow focus and like focusing on the fundamentals are very important.
And how do we know what the fundamentals are?
I think as a business, like cash in, cash out, like for everything that you do, like what is like what are the costs of doing it and like how much revenue does it generate?
Mm,
Like how much engagement does it generate? Like how well does it solve the problem for the customers? How happy are they? Like knowing like how well any problems are solved. I think there's like very like fundamental things of like building a business that like I think in tech like we've gotten like a chance to like quantify everything and like do everything. But I think when you look at like just like fundamental business, like money in
yeah.
versus money out, like I think that's like some of the most important stuff that I've learned like working at a startup that like has reached product market fit or was in the process of reaching product market fit and then like scaling. I think it's
Yeah.
like you just really have to understand that like business is about like doing the right thing for your customer and then doing the right thing for your business, which is like helping it grow and like helping it scale over time and like just generating revenue to like make sure it's a sustainable business model over time. So I think that's what I would focus on. Yeah.
Makes sense. All right. What parting thoughts do you have for us, for everyone to know about the action that you want them to take after they read your book?
Yeah, yeah. I think you can go and read the book and go in with an open mind of like this is just like one way to view like how product management is done. I think product management at startups teaches you like a lot about like how to build a startup and like how to build businesses and like work with stakeholders and build skills that like help you in the long run, whether you want to be a founder, investor, or like more senior PM in the future. I think there's product management at big tech, which is very different. Product management at different stages of companies, different industries and verticals. Like certain industries might require more industry experience. Certain industries might be more intuitive to most people. I think it's just like one way and one perspective. And so like the thing that I want to do is like kind of like empower people to like build these skills over time so that they
Mm-hmm.
can do kind of anything on their own in the future and like kind of give them that skill set that will like help them in a lot of ways in the future. I think like the main parting message is that like I think if you really want to be a founder, if you really want to build a business or like you want to learn those fundamental skills, like definitely check out the book. But I think in general, working at a startup kind of like just prepares you so well for the future.
Yeah.
I think having been through like a lot of challenges, like working in a startup and like kind of seeing it grow over time, I think it built my like patience up for like building a company and seeing that like there's like a process of like slow compounding over time. There's like a video on YouTube that you can look up on like slow compounding, but I think like things aren't built very quickly and like you often have to put your like head down for like multiple years before you see any results and success. So
Mm,
I think working in a startup kind of like teaches you how to think as a long-term thinker.
yeah.
And if you think in like 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, like 20 years in like a long-term frame of mind, I think it really prepares you for anything that you want to do in life. So that's why I would recommend working in a startup. And yeah, no, I really hope to connect with a lot of you who are interested in, similar things in product management and startups and beyond.
And is your goal to have your own company in the future?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think like that's definitely like one of my goals in the future. I think being able to like solve a problem that's out there in the world that isn't being solved well right now, and like kind of like is like built backed by a strong mission that like
Right.
will help like kind of like democratize access to something. I think I'm really like passionate about like finding something in the future that will help solve a problem in the world and like hopefully can build a business around it. So
Yeah.
I think one day definitely, yeah.
Well, I'm excited for you, and I'm excited for people to start reading your book. And what are some of the ways for people to share their takeaways as they're reading through the different chapters?
Yeah, definitely. I think, anyone who reads the book, feel free to share it on LinkedIn, like any learnings that you have. Like if there's any like, like chapter or like specific line or like sentence or paragraph that resonates with you, just share it online, like on
Yeah,
LinkedIn, on X, Twitter, any platform that you really enjoy. I think even sharing it with your friends on Instagram, we would really appreciate it. And if you want to leave a review, you can leave a review on Amazon. That's where you can check out the book. So yeah, would definitely appreciate anyone who checks it out and shares it with their friends and family and network.
that's great. Well, thank you so much for coming on to my live stream. It was so enlightening and fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nancy. I really appreciate it, and great questions, and super excited to keep in touch. Yeah.
A lot of people say I ask a lot of questions.
They're great questions. So yeah,
Well,
you
thank you
definitely
so
recommend
much.
coming on to this live stream in the future. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much and have a good day.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.